everyone. This is Stone Mims with Linus and Parker Magazine. I am the senior editor for political commentary. I have the honor of sitting here with Devante Hill, who is running for a Democratic candidate for District 9 in Memphis, Tennessee. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Mims.
All right. Well, just to get started, I'd like to give our audience a sort of a view of who you are as a person, as an emerging political figure. Can you take a moment to just introduce yourself? Tell us about your background and the things that make you sort of stand out as a candidate.
Sure. My name is Devante Hill. I am, aside from an emerging political figure, I'm an entrepreneur, an activist. The list goes on and on and on, but I think the most important factoid that I fall under would be a servant. I have always, since my birth, I've been raised to meet people at their need, and I'm just honored to be in the space of my life where that need and that call is now sending me to a place called Capitol Hill. And so we've done the groundwork over the course of the last decade or so. And even before then, we've just been meeting every issue as an opportunity to advance the love, the power, and the light of God.
Let's sort of zone in on the sort of last comments on faith and the light of God. I understand that your faith and religion has played a large role in the way that you view leadership, community, and sort of grassroots activism. So, can you talk a little bit about the role that faith has played in your life?
Sure. I think w- when we look at 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think the difference between the Black Lives Matter movement and the civil rights era as we know it, as we celebrate Black History Month, the difference between the two is the emergence of Black Lives Matter happened out of the silence of the Black church. We notice in the civil rights movement when you have your Dr. Kings and your Nat King Coles and your these movements were spirit and God driven and God led. The moral compass of these movements were rooted in spirituality. And so
Mhm.
we see the rise of Black Lives Matter in 2020 out of the silence of the Black church. And so I am among few leaders who I see throughout the country that are leading this movement in a way that millennials can still identify the
Right.
moral compass of a movement. And I don't think we can tell anyone how to be angry or how to be enraged or if they should or shouldn't. But I think that we have to have guidance with our rage so that we aren't interpreted as a deep rebellion as, instead of good resistance.
I understand that you've had sort of firsthand experience with activism in the sort of post George Floyd moment. I remember that summer very vividly. I think every African American does, of those state sanctioned murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. Could you speak a little bit about your work during that time period and the work as you saw it then and where you think it needs to go now?
Yeah, I think during that time, as you stated, with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, I mean, the list kind of goes on. I think we had come to a place in our country where we had a unique opportunity to turn and pivot. And I'd like to say, in many ways, we were able to do so. I think it's vitally important as we exit Black History Month, which gives us the opportunity to pause and reflect on how far we've come. Sometimes when we are so caught up in the trauma, you really can't see the advancement that you have lived through. But I think in 2020, it propelled a lot of systems to shift. It's where we started to see the 8 can't wait laws and policies began to be implemented in police policies around the country. Even locally here in Memphis, Tennessee, obviously the entire country was up in flames during that time. And Memphis, of all cities, was the only city where we did not experience rioting. We did not experience any type of heinous activity, but we united and we came up with solutions. And those tangible solutions are the actual policy changes that gave the police director the capacity to fire the officers with Tyree Nichols. When Tyree
Hmm.
Nichols was killed just about, I think, 3 or 4 years later, we had already made the shifts in our local government to amend what was typical for Black communities to where we would have to plead for body cam footage and we would have to live with the officers being on a paid leave until an investigation happened. The policy changes we were able to make in 2020 gave us the capacity to fire those officers immediately and swiftly move them into the hands of justice. And so I'd like to say that we were able to pull some tangible wins from that season and that time.
Right.
But just because we were able to get tangible wins from that moment and that time does not mean that the work does not continue.
Mhm. No, very well said. I want to take a moment to back up because I'm sure that we're going to circle back to sort of commentary and discussion on police practices. I know that you're probably more than aware as someone in Tennessee is recent criticisms of ICE and immigration services as and the way they sort of dovetail with the history of policing in the country. But I want to take a moment to give audience some sort of more clear look at your sort of history of leadership. You've been a faith-based leader, you've been in the US military, and then you sort of shifted towards activism. Talk to me about wearing those different hats and the lessons that you learned along the way.
I'd like to start where I'd like to believe my launch pad happened in the world of activism because it was the full circle moment where it all began to make sense. I had no intentions of ever diving into activism. I actually took an injury in the military and
Mhm.
ended up with an internship on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. in our current congressman's office, my incumbent, also the person that I'm having to run against 10 years ago.
Right.
Let you know how long he's been there.
Yep.
But during that time, the Freddie Gray riots were happening. And at the time, my mentor, Dr. Jamal Bryant, put out a clarion call for all young people to be a part of bringing peace in Baltimore. So I left Capitol Hill that day and went out to Baltimore as riots were happening. They were shooting, they were doing all types of stuff. And I noticed that there was a righteous rage, but there was an absence of wisdom and there was an absence of
Mhm.
direction. It was just, we're mad, let's flip the table, but we don't have a plan afterwards. And so for me, it was like it was understanding the importance of having a strategy and a structure in place
Right.
after you've created the resistance, after you've created the good trouble. What makes the trouble good is the good that happens after the trouble. And so a lot of us in this age and time, as we have called ourselves activists, we have been great at igniting the trouble and shaking up the trouble or resisting in a way that is troublesome. But what makes that trouble good is having a strategic, tangible plan after you were able to shake things up.
I want to dive deeper into that. I had the privilege of sort of reading your bio as sort of preparing for this interview. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was this quote that you said that you felt the country had fallen too far right and too far left simultaneously, and that left everyday American citizens without leadership. Can you elaborate more on that idea?
Yeah, I think most American citizens, we are experiencing the trauma of a bad breakup of our home being split in half. And we
Mhm.
are caught in between a divorce that we didn't ask for. And so as a result, our politics have become so far left that we have forgotten that there is a right way to do things. And we have gone so far right that we are forgetting that we still have people left that we need to consider. And so I'm working every single day, even as a human being, to be a median voice in the middle to say, hey, we're leaning too far over this way, or hey, we're going too far over this way. And I think when we have a good balance of politics and bring people together and to start having conversations that are hard, that may not be comfortable, but they may be necessary, I think we will then start seeing true policy change happen on a federal level, even down to the state.
I know that many people, in light of recent events, I'm thinking of the what's happening down in Minneapolis. I'm thinking of the State of the Union address. Feel as though things are more divided than ever. What would you say to those voters in your community who feel as though there's no return, who feel as though you know that people are too different from them, that they have lost a sense of sameness with other Americans?
You know, mental health is one of the pillars of my campaign. And
Mhm.
as I unpack what mental health looks like and how we can support mental health on a federal level, we also have to come to the realization that a lot of folks aren't necessarily reacting in a way that is unrealistic.
Mhm.
Sometimes when we see people in a rage, we're it's like we're contorting them to being disorderly, but perhaps they are responding to the disorder. And when we begin to unpack what disorder looks like in every community, not just white, not just black, but even in the black community, we have a classism issue. There's so many complexities psychologically that we would need to unpack as we talk about mental health and what that looks like. But for me, I think it's just vitally important that we find our commonalities amongst each
Right.
other. And if we can leverage our commonalities, it's easy then to say, well, we agree on most things. Let's now talk about the things that maybe we just don't agree on, and let's figure out how to find a common ground. And I think when we learn that language on what that looks like of building bridges, I think then we start building bridges and then instead of building walls.
I want to refer back to something that you brought up ahead of me in sort of anticipation of a question I was going to ask, but it's about Steve Cohen, who you're sort of running against. As you noted, that he's had sort of 10 consecutive terms. He's been in office since 2007, I believe. Talk to me about how your leadership will look different um, from his, and more specifically, I'm curious how you would respond. You're coming in with a variety of experience as an activist, as a social servant, um, and he's coming in with sort of a wealth of perhaps over experience in this office. What would you say to voters who are, concerned about your level of experience in the field?
Yeah, I would first start out by saying I'm not running against Steve Cohen. I'm running for him. I'm running for Steve Cohen so that he can step to the side and know that his legacy and his hard work will be intact. I'm not running to pick apart his 20 years in this particular seat. I'm running because he has done such a monumental job that at 76 or so, with Parkinson's, with polio, he can step aside and know that he has done a phenomenal job. And there are other capable, competent leaders that have come through his auspice that are capable and that are competent and that have capacity to do this work. He mentioned to one of our local newspapers that if any of the other candidates had the capacity to extend leadership in this space, that it would be me. And so our current incumbent understands that I have the capacity to do this work. He is just not convinced that he is done doing the work. But at 76, my grandfather, when he turned 76, I told him, I need your keys because there's no reason why you have to continue to drive. You have enough kids and grandkids that we can take you wherever you want to go. And it's the same with Congressman Steve Cohen.
Hmm.
Um, we have capacity. We've shown ourselves. We've done the work. We've done the grassroots work, the systemic work, the structural work, the philanthropic work, the entrepreneurial work. There's nothing else that we can do to prove ourselves to be capable of doing this rather than to jumping out there and run and to convince him that we are the candidate that he should not just endorse but also vote for.
I love that, and it's almost a return to politics that have felt lost. We live in an era where people watch these sort of debates happen, and there's vitriol, there's grudges, and it's a very different environment to have a candidate speak so highly of another, and also sort of see himself in conversation with and in allied with another candidate. So I just want to sort of point that out.
Yeah, if we put a blindfold on and we didn't know Steve Cohen's skin color, he has voted no different in the House as a John Lewis or an
Mhm.
Elijah Cummings. I think the only place we perhaps differ is how appropriations are happening and how we advocate for those appropriations and who we should be advocating for those appropriations for. Is probably where we're seeing some differences. And at 76, Parkinson's and polio, you shouldn't have to continue to fight. There should be other young leaders that are competent and capable of grabbing that reins and being able to have the energy to be able to be a part of multiple fights that are happening across the country.
Mhm.
There are so many issues happening beyond ICE, beyond the Memphis Safe Task Force, which is the federal officers parading around this area. There's also we got to figure out why our young black African American men who are educated are finding themselves being accused or alleged suicide, and perhaps some of them have been investigated to not be suicide, but maybe even murder or foul play. And so there are so many complexities and so many different fights. And Memphis being one of the blackest cities in the country, we need a black leader that can step to the podium and address not just the complexities in Memphis, but the complexities that are happening on a national level.
Mhm. No, you bring that up, and I think there was a recent killing, or you know, alleged suicide in Atlanta where a 21-year-old black man was found.
Georgia State.
um, Yep. Um, and so I guess I wanna dig deeper into that complexity and your sort of, perspective on it. Um, how do you bridge conversations between, local police and black citizens who are concerned that enough is not being done in these investigations into instances like this?
I think we I think we need a Congress that can push for our civil. Typically, this would be something that the Department of Justice would ignite their civil rights department to jump in and investigate. The FBI would jump on top of this, but because of the regime and the authoritarian leader that we have in the country now, that's using the Department of Justice to hide the fact that he has committed crimes against a minor sexually, we literally don't have the space or capacity because we are fighting corruption. We can't fight the things that are happening on the ground. And so there is a tide shift that has to happen. If not, an eruption will happen on the ground. And so it's important that we have solid minded leaders with wisdom and with courage that can step to these issues and have the energy to have something to say about everything.
I want to sort of imagine imagine your career going forward from this point. And you brought up issues like policing, mental health, and other sort of issues that are plaguing our American communities, but particularly within Memphis. But if you had to speak to perhaps what you see as the greatest challenges facing the American people right now, what are some of those challenges and what solutions do you sort of envision for sort of acknowledging them?
I think our greatest challenge as a country and even as a culture individually, our culture, white culture, black culture, Jewish culture, I think our inability to come to the table and say, we missed the mark. We missed the mark. And some of us who are black will have to say we missed the mark because we allowed our rage to be louder than our logic. And sometimes we're gonna have to find some folks who are clear, our clear brothers and sisters will have to say they missed the mark because they didn't participate in slavery, so they misaligned themselves to the responsibility of white privilege. I think there's just there has to be some acknowledgement that happens societally in order for us to be able to come to the table. We got to operate in the spirit of humility. We probably need to figure out a way to communicate our indifferences and also understand that as other people are communicating their differences, there may be a space and time out of ignorance that we are offended. And we've got to be able to communicate in those spaces and not allow our trauma to be triggered.
Mhm. And to that, I sort of want to ask the next logical question, because you've sort of been a concerned citizen, you've been an activist, you've sort of had all of these different roles. Why now? Why is this the year that you've sort of taken it upon yourself to want to run? What about this particular moment has sort of catalyzed you to want to launch into this sort of shift?
Yeah, you got to know I've asked myself that more times than I can count on a day-to-day basis. I'm literally asking myself, well, now, why in the hell would you want to do something like this? The truth of the matter is, this is not something that is my preference. I can promise you that. But I can't sleep at night unless I answer the call. You ever lay down to take a nap and your phone just won't stop
Right.
ringing? It's like, gosh, I put the phone on silent and then the alarm goes off. It's just like a consistent notification coming in on your phone. That's how my life has been the last 3 to 4 years. And me being misaligned with the moment, I began to quickly realize a decline in all of my ambition and all of my endeavors because God was calling me to get back to the place that He set forth and the path that He set for me to take. And I found nothing but favor since then. And so I have oftentimes said that I know I'm doing the right thing when I have come to a dead end and I've been redirected to a place, and that place is extending to me some degree of grace. And so I found grace in this place, and I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I know that I'm doing the right thing, and I'm going to see it through.
I think that there is a preeminent amount of voters. I have a background in voter registration, working with Pro Georgia and the NAACP, and what I found is that a disproportionate amount of voters only vote for presidential elections. So, what would you say to those voters who, are like haven't registered or are registered but only vote presidential, who don't necessarily see a point in midterms in voting for congressmen. What would you say to them? What would you say to them to sort of motivate them to shift their
I
opinions?
Yeah, for sure. I was once that type of a voter. I've always been a voter, but I was once that type of a voter that only voted in the presidential elections, and sometimes the local elections. But I would say that we lose our voice when we refuse to extend our vote. Your vote is single-handedly the most powerful tool you'll ever be able to have beyond being able to show up to the polls. Like it's a magical thing when black folks show up to the polls, especially when we realize that the journey before us and all that they had gone through in order for us to be able to vote. When we start to consider those things and realize that our voices aren't being heard on a viral TikTok video, our voices aren't necessarily being heard on just on Facebook or just on X. But the true way to make sure that your voice is heard and accounted for is by showing up to the ballot box and extending your vote
Mhm.
whenever you can.
I want to circle back to earlier we had a conversation sort of about police brutality. And I said that we'd circle back to discuss ICE. And in Tennessee, there's actually quite a large, ICE population. What is your stance on sort of some of the things that have been happening with ICE coming into different states, being deployed, and some of the you know pushback against that, like we've seen in Minnesota? Like, where do you sort of weigh in, and what do you see as the way forward in acknowledging these concerns over immigration and state-sanctioned violence that we've sort of seen in the last year?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of cities have experienced truly a surge in crime. Obviously, when people are hungry and they are experiencing poverty, the fruit of poverty is crime. And so instead of addressing the real issue, which is poverty, this presidential administration formulated his own convoy and dispersed them throughout the country, predominantly Democratic cities, and said that he was cleaning up crime. He also was covering up his play in the Epstein files by fulfilling his campaign promise to deport those who were undocumented and begin this trend of calling them illegal criminals. And so we find ICE grabbing folks off the job, grabbing people out of school, grabbing folks off the top of houses, putting new roofs on the jobs that a lot of us can't do or won't do, that the immigrant community comes in, they do gladly and they do it well and they do it probably better than most of us, grabbing them off the job and calling them illegal immigrants. If we pay attention to these cities that have seen this upsurge, we'll notice that as they tout how they're cleaning up crime, they're not really releasing the numbers of people that they are detaining and the number of individuals that they are deporting. And so it's just baffling to me to hear the president of the United States defend protesters on the other side of the globe, but is on record using federal agents to kill protesters here domestically. So it's just a bunch of hypocritical nonsense that's happening from the White House to the schoolhouse to the courthouse. And that's why it's time for young leaders like myself to rise and emerge and step into these places with wisdom, with a sound mind, and with an articulation to just do a moral compass check on some of these folks. I think we're not getting far going back and forth, and let's just do a moral compass. You say you love the Lord. Well, God says, well, first of all, Jesus was an immigrant. And when the president of the United States got up on his State of the Union address and touted how he ripped 2.5 million people off of food stamps. When did we become a country where we celebrate ripping food off the table? We have to continue to evolve and not regress as a country and as a culture.
We've sort of been talking in circles around Trump, um, and some of his recent scandals, from his
Mhm.
presentation of Barack Obama and Michelle as apes
Yep.
to his role in the Epstein files. Do you think the problem is just with the person in the White House, just the leadership, or is there something more deep seated and concerning happening? What would you say to voters who
I
looking at?
think I think the GOP has a master. I think the GOP has found a master puppet to utilize and pimp the fears of constituents across the country. most people aren't truly afraid. Most people don't truly have a deep disdain for their neighbor, but perhaps the things that we don't understand or the things that we fear, we create narratives or we allow people to create narratives for. I think Donald Trump is using all of these narratives to perhaps create a distraction from the work that needs to be done in this country. And I'm reminded of the scripture, Nehemiah chapter 6, verse number 3, when Nehemiah was compelled to go and build a wall for his city and make advancements for his city. And he was faced with many distractions, and not all of his distractions were enemies. Some of his distractions were his neighbors, his friends. They said, Nehemiah, Nehemiah, come down, let's talk, let's hang, let's chill, let's put our attention here, let's be distracted. And Nehemiah looked down, he says, I'm doing a good work and I can't come down. And I think that has to be our focus here. We have to continue to move the needle. We have to continue to do the work. We should have passed the George Floyd Memorial Act, and in that case, we wouldn't have had a Tyree Nichols circumstance. Our legislation will be different. So federal officers like ICE will be under a specific set of guidelines from the federal government. So we are regressing because we are distracted. And so we have to lose the distractions. We have to put our hands to the plow and continue to pave a way forward.
All right. So last question I'm going to ask you. This last question, where do you see your career sort of going from here? I like to sort of, if we're sort of going to give our audience a sort of trajectory of where you're headed and what you hope to achieve in the next few years, what does that look like? Speaking as optimistically as you can.
You know, I got to be honest with you. A retirement for me looks like 45. I'm 33 now. I want to raise my family on a farm. I want to get back to the country. The city has been fun. Shaping and advancing and helping the culture has been fun, but I'm looking forward to getting into a space economically where I can fund young leaders who are emerging that need perhaps support and exposure. I'd like to be the godfather of support and exposure for the next generation if I could give a trajectory of the next 10 years.
All right. I think that's a lovely place, actually. And thank you so much, Devante, for making the time to come. We really appreciate you and we're rooting for you.
Hey, thank you, my friend, for doing this for me, and I don't take it for granted. Whenever you guys call, I'm coming, no matter what.
Thank you so much, man.
For sure. Thank you, guys.